I'm doing a Great British Bake Off 2024 Bake Along. Let's get into Biscuit Week. So this week's signature bake was Viennese Whirls, which I had seen before on the show, but like the lemon drizzle cake from last week, had never taken the time to actually make. Now this challenge that I have set for myself is not a timed one, so I actually turned this into a 2-day bake by making the homemade raspberry jam the night before. And honestly, homemade raspberry jam is super easy. All it is mashing up raspberries with some sugar and lemon juice, and then cooking them until they reach about 220 degrees so that the jam will set when cooled. I let that set up in the fridge overnight, and just like that, I was already 30% of the way done with this bake. The next day required a little bit more effort. I started off by measuring out the ingredients for my biscuit dough, which, like most European recipes, was all in grams, and then setting that aside. The one tweak I made to the recipe was to add a pinch or two of salt because I could tell that these biscuits overall were going to be quite sweet. Anyway, I then whipped up my room temperature unsalted butter in the stand mixer, added the sugar, and then added the dry ingredients, mixing it until the dough came together. You actually want this dough to be quite soft, as the next step is to pipe it into the classic whirl shape. So I loaded up my piping bag, tried this hack I saw online where you twist the bottom of the bag and then scoop in whatever you're piping, which did not work out very well with cookie dough, just FYI, and then started actually piping the whirls. Now, my recipe recommended that you actually draw out individual circles on some parchment paper and then use that as a guide while piping, but I am much too lazy to do anything like that, so these were all just eyeballed. And I think all things considered, they turned out pretty even. I did incorporate a tip I picked up from watching the Biscuit Week episode, which was to pop these into the freezer for a few minutes so that they didn't just immediately melt when they went into the oven. These ended up baking for about 13 minutes at 375 degrees, and despite the second tray being a bit darker than the first, I think they turned out okay. I let them cool completely on a wire rack so that the fillings didn't smoosh out when I sandwiched everything together, and then started my buttercream. This was super simple and consisted of just whipping together some butter, powdered sugar, and vanilla. Using a hand mixer, I mixed this until it was light and fluffy and then set it aside. Now that all my mises were in place, it was time to build these whirls. I tried to match up each side so that they were relatively even, and then piped on a ring of buttercream, added a dollop of jam in the middle, and then sandwiched the two biscuit halves together. These are fairly delicate biscuits, so be gentle during the sandwiching process. I quickly learned that it was much more efficient to do all of the piping, dolloping, and then sandwiching all at once, but before long I had 12 fairly identical Viennese whirls, plus 4 that were a little on the well done side. Whoops. Now, if I were to present these in the tent, I'm pretty sure that Paul would say,
"They're a little bit flat. You've lost a little bit of definition in them as well."
Which is quite fair. I think my biggest triumph was that I was able to achieve the super buttery melt-in-your-mouth texture that Paul and Prue kept going on about in the episode, which is truly a delight. The raspberry jam had a nice tang, but if I were to make these again, I'd probably go with a French buttercream since it's even more silky and delicious than the buttercream I made here. I think overall, my biggest gripe with these is just that even with the jam, this still reads very, very sweet. I think some of the chocolate variations or coffee that I saw on Bake Off this past week would go really well with this because that hint of bitterness would really help to balance out the entire cookie. Or biscuit, sorry. Overall though, I think that my Biscuit Week bake was a success, and I will see you back here for Bread Week.